Good evening, everyone. Today we have a dip into insanity. Nah, for real though, this is a American grinder manufacturing company, number 3 bench grinder. So I found this really cool tool catalog from the 20s where it talks about the different grinders. So there's the number 1 for household use. There's the number 2 for the mechanic. And then the number 3, which is for the shop and garage. Because it's just the right size to have a permanent place at the end of the workbench in a small shop or private garage. Monument workers find it just the thing for sharpening their lettering tools. So, now you know the purpose of the number 3. My purpose for redoing this was actually, I have a future video I was hoping to work on where I was going to need to grind some metal. And I thought, oh man, I'll just take this thing apart, put it back together, and use this in the video. And that project got totally derailed because I worked on this for, I'm going to say off and on for like 3 weeks. You know, I'd take some parts apart, repair some parts, put it away, come back to it. Life has been stressful lately. I don't know if you guys have looked around, but it has been. And taking this thing apart was actually no simple matter as much as I thought it would be. I guess maybe I overestimated how something would be made. I mean, you always hear like the old adage, like, "Oh, tools today aren't meant to be repaired," and I don't know that tools always were meant to be repaired. Some things were, some things weren't. Anyway, whatever. That's a whole thing. But you can kind of see here through the disassembly. There's some missing parts. For example, there should be a foot on that screw that kind of locks everything into place. It's gone. The tool rest is gone. There's a few other things like the oil cap that's gone. Some of those things I found and just kind of made work, and others I kind of manufactured. So we'll get into that a little bit more. But basically, the condition that this tool was in was very dirty, not serviced for a long time, but certainly in a condition that could be brought right back to life and function almost like new. I mean, if I was 100 years old, which I will never be, I don't think anything I would have on me would work at all. I'm in my 30s and things barely work. So just an example, this is a well-manufactured tool, even though not everything is meant to be taken apart, as we will later address. A lot of times with these old tools, you're really fighting just wear and tear on top of old grease and grime and dirt. So as the thing was used, it had grease on it or oil, and then metal shavings fall into that. It mixes up with the dust and crust of any shop, and then it just becomes like a really hardened glue, which is just a blast, really. Anyway, here we go. We'll start talking about what I'm actually doing. So I wanted to remove this grinding wheel that was on it, which is comically small. Not the category. What is that thing? Catalog. Wow. The catalog mentioned 6-inch grinding disc would be what you would want to use. This is not 6 inches. It's like 4, 3, something like that. Anyway, reverse threaded nut, and then you have the clamping system. You can see the arbor in that is like super small compared to what you would normally use on a bigger disc. Really cool to have that old grinding disc. I'm not sure the era in which it was in. The label looks awesome, so I'm going to keep it because we don't throw things away. So the recipe of restoration a lot of times when taking things apart for me is penetrating oil and hope. you hope the penetrating oil does its job, so that way you can remove all the screws and parts that are attached. The other thing I like to do when kind of exploring is I'll take a razor blade, especially with these really disgusting pieces, and just kind of start to scrape away to see what kind of paint we're talking about, how deep the crust is. And then also you start to find things about the casting, stamps, different things like that. These bolts were actually so crusted in there, I thought that the backside of the casting was fixed, but it's actually a through cast, like where you can thread the screw all the way through it, but I couldn't tell because it was so disgustingly caked with grease and everything like that. In fact, here I'm scraping across the two different parts of the casting because I want to see, where the line is between the two, where it's going to come apart, and see what's exactly in there. I mean, just chunks fall off of this thing. It's kind of exciting. There's a part of it that is deeply satisfying as you're scraping off these big chunks of muck, we'll call it. But then there's another part that you're like, how am I ever going to make this thing clean? So I guess that's the duality of life. So these screws didn't want to come out, so you go to the manual impact driver and beat the devil out of them, as our good friend Bob Ross would say. And I beat the devil out of this tool. I was a little concerned to break anything. I mean, I think that's always the balance you have to take, is how far am I going to take it before I break it? And you never know. You don't know exactly how far you're going to go, because this thing's been around for 100 years, so we don't know how it was really treated. It was a shop tool, so we assume it was used and abused, as it should be. So whatever. Fought with this quite a bit. Friends, let me tell you, there's a lot I don't include in this. Hours of trying to figure out how to take things apart and kind of exploring. And eventually the video is just going to get too long. This one's going to be a long one. So bear with us. But so here I'm going to take out the drive threaded, the drive rod. I don't know what the right term for this is. You can kind of see the clamp that's on there, and you can see the teeth that the gear would ride in. They're worn, but not in horrible condition where I would have to try and find a new part. It's been used quite a bit, and it's not that bad. And then there's the main gear, and again, not that bad would be the condition I would claim it in. A little rusty, a little crusty, needed cleaning, needs service, so not that bad. The handle here, that was a little harder to take apart, and we'll kind of address that situation later. And then sort of the attachment to the rod that attaches to the gear. Sometimes I don't know the right terms for things, and that is okay. I'm just going to make things up as I go along. Kind of cool, though, there was a brass sleeve in the casting. I left that totally alone, didn't want to mess with that at all. But it helps certainly with the wear and tear, and you actually see the gear wasn't in bad shape, and I think that's because of that. Now the arbor clamp situation here was actually tapered, so I had to drive it out. A little nerve-wracking here, but it did come out pretty easily once it got past the taper. And when I reassemble, I have to bang it on again, which I don't like doing. But see, just another shot of what I'm talking about from the grease and grime that's in here. It's very tasty, let me tell you. Put that on a sandwich, you got yourself a good sandwich. So just kind of exploring. Times you have to be a little rougher than others. It looks like I'm just beating this thing to death, but I'm being very judicious with swinging of the hammer and things like that. So don't worry, I don't break anything yet. I have broke things. but not on this particular project. So a lot of the screws were in rougher shape. I didn't necessarily help them by trying to force them out, but you got to do what you got to do. So here we go. The real bane of my existence in this project were these two screws that hold in the clamping arm, we'll call it. They were driven in and then peened over so they wouldn't come out over time as vibration and all that. I made it my mission in life to remove these things, and at first I thought I could just kind of file it down, and that did not work, did not give me the results I was looking for. So later we tackle that again. So I kind of go in different phases where I try something for a while and then give up on it and try back. So kind of focusing on cleaning at this point. As I'm cleaning and scraping, I'm finding, holes in the casting, trying to like figure out what I'm missing. I couldn't find a ton of really great information on this to tell me all the parts that I was potentially missing. And you look at eBay results, for example, of people selling similar items, they're all missing the same thing. No one has the tool rest. No one has an oil cup. Like thumb screws are missing. So you're kind of just figuring it out as you go along, which is all right. Now for degreasing, I wanted to try and use something different than usual. So I tried this WD-40 brand degreaser for engines. It did not do the trick all the way. So then I went to the old standby, which is soapy water, let that soak, try and get as much of that grease wet as possible. Did not work. So I went back to the degreaser. Guys, I read the instructions, okay? So you can't fault me. Anyway, so then I thought, well, I'll soak all the parts in the degreaser. In the meantime, I cut my hand really bad, so I had to wear gloves for a lot of the process to try and keep my hand from getting too infected. So you see a lot of gloves, which is actually the smartest thing to do because how gross this was. Sometimes I wonder why I don't wear gloves more often, but I think part of it has to do with my gloves are a size small and I wear a size large, so I just kind of force it to work. But anyway, a lot of the process here is just trying to scrape off, but at some point in the process I start to see the actual paint, which is really cool. So with this paint too, I'm not sure if this is Japanning or something like that. It has a sheen to it and it didn't come off easy, so maybe that's it. But I went after it after the whole thing with the metal scraper and razor blade back and forth while trying to get all the grease and gunk off of this, and that is very fun. So the other thing I started to use by recommendation of my mother was this stuff called Totally Awesome or Awesome. You can get it at like dollar store, and I knew this was going to work because as soon as I smelled it, I knew that I had lost 3 years of my life. And actually, I get some of the best results with Awesome. Watch this. Boom. Spray that on there, let it soak, and then all of that crap just came off of there with pretty much a simple wipe. So I'm going to say, if you're in a pinch and you need some cleaning spray, use Awesome, but don't breathe it or even look at it. So at this point, I wanted to remove the little manufacturing plate. It's a really cool brass plate, and it was pinned in there with some brass nails. I almost lost it. Where does it go? Right there, buddy. Kind of hanging on to my little wood vise. It's in pretty good shape, realistically, 400 years old. Back to the screws that were pinned over. I thought maybe I could sand them down with the Dremel, and it really just wasn't getting me enough work, work done. So I went to the cutting disc. And one of the things I had to do is when they pinned over the screw, it collapsed the slot in the screw, so I had to cut a new slot. And it was a very nerve-wracking process for me because I really didn't want to ruin the screw. I wanted to try and use as much original parts as possible as the usual. But I cut a slot that's roughly the same size as the other screw, so it kind of worked out. And just had to go to town. So what I would do is I would hit it with the manual impact driver, and then, you know, cut down some more of the screw that was remaining, or knock it down with a punch, and then go back to it. So kind of going back and forth between grinding, hitting the sides with the punch, and then using a manual impact driver. And then finally it released its prizes to me, and I don't know if you can actually hear it in the video, but I'm just silently going, yes, 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 come out of there, come out of there. And then just laughter when I see the actual screw come out. So what I'm doing here is I'm just kind of shaving down the screw to try and leave as much material as possible, because I want to reuse these. You know, it's a balancing point for sure. And, you know, this was super unnecessary, I think, besides just the fact that, like, I have to get this done. I need this part to come apart because I know it's supposed to come apart at some point. And realistically, this isn't actually something that's supposed to be serviced. It serves no purpose besides that I knew there was going to be some grime and gunk underneath there that I wanted to clean. So in that purpose, yes, it needed to come apart. But realistically, completely unnecessary, and something I spent way too much time on trying to accomplish for really no possible good results. You know, here you go. Here's the big reveal. Just crap underneath there. It's really not important at all. That part is really just supposed to be rock solid, so that way when it's mounted, it doesn't move and it doesn't come off your workbench or whatever you have. So whatever. But I still got it done. Now onto the handle. Here you can kind of see in this shot how flattened the threads on the rod actually are. And the reason that is what the handle is doing is it's spinning inside of the shaft on the arm that's attached to the gear, and it's just flattening all those threads. So I had to really fight to take the square bolt or the square nut off, and kind of basically when I did that, it re-threaded the rod, which was great. So I didn't have to like go through and redo that myself. The actual wooden handle was in okay shape. I probably could have rescued it, and I didn't throw it away because we don't throw things away. But I wanted to challenge myself to remake the handle on the lathe. So I tackle that a little later on. With a lot of these projects, you sometimes don't know that there's different parts because they're so disgusting. I didn't realize there was a brass collar on the handle until I actually disassembled it and started to clean it up a little bit. So there's still a few parts that were still really crusty. So I really didn't have much of a choice besides just a wire wheel as much of the crust off. I wanted to, I always try to keep my evaporust as clean as possible. And, I have to de-rust some of these parts. With a project like this, even if I don't see rust, I throw it all in the evaporust. It's so safe. I'm not worried about, it ruining too much. So kind of just dump everything in there. So on to remaking the handle, I had just a few scraps of walnut and wanted to give it a shot. I like the way walnut looks. Obviously, it's a beautiful wood, and I don't throw scraps away. So just thought I'd give it a shot. Kind of just doing some prep work to get it ready for the lathe. Glue it up, get it flat, get my measurements right, that whole thing. Part of, as I've touched before on, part of what I'm trying to do with all these projects is just to teach myself more skills. With this, I got to do a little bit of metal work, got to turn something on the lathe, repair work. It's all new skills. It's all fun for me. So I'm not going to spend a ton of time showing the process of making the handle on the lathe. That could have been a whole video itself, and I actually considered breaking this video up into different parts and showing like wood turning and different things like that, but that's for another day. I practice a lot on the lathe off camera, just making little things here and there. so I thought I'd actually film this one a little bit. I'm a novice for sure at the lathe. Maybe not even close enough to say I'm a novice, but it's really exciting to take something and to turn it down. Like I made the handle and I was so excited that I didn't really follow the process I needed to do, and I cut it off immediately and then took it in to show it to my lady, and I was like, I made this handle, and she was like, great job. And then I was like, oh crap, I gotta drill a through hole through this, and that caused me some problems later, but you will see. Anyway, so quick, lathing video. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I will say I overshot, and the handle is slightly too long. It doesn't really hurt anything long term on the project, but it is just a little too long. But all in all, I got pretty close to matching the style, and I'm pretty proud of it. But I kept the handle if I decide I want to go back to the original handle idea. So here I am, just being totally silly, rushing through it. So then I thought, I will drill the through hole by hand. I ruined my handle. Fast forward several hours, I fixed it. I made a dowel. I put a dowel in there, and then I drilled it on the lathe, which is what I should have done in the first stupid place. But whatever. You live and you learn. So just using a little Danish oil on it, on the handle. And I think later I put some wax on there too. Making that handle was actually a lot of fun and very frustrating, and learned so much, especially when I made that mistake. After evaporust, take everything back to the wire wheel. I don't show that very much because you've seen it before. And I want to remove the paint that was existing on there, so back to the Agent Orange. I got pretty decent results actually with the paint thinner this time, or the paint remover, excuse me. And there you go, that's afterwards. And the next thing is there's some rougher spots on the metal, so I'm just kind of giving a little bit of a sand before I do some painting and primer. So used a self-etching primer. I think I gave it 3 coats. And then I experimented with some brush on enamel paint, and it totally did not work, and I had to completely repaint it, and I did all that off camera. So anyway, kind of cleaning up the brass plate. So I just wanted to paint over so it had a little bit of a background, and then hit it with like a 1000 grit sandpaper to make it shine a little bit. I didn't worry about making it like perfect. You can kind of see there's some brass like shining through in some other parts. It was perfectly great, and actually looks really good, not perfect on the tool. So the next thing I needed to tackle was to get a new foot for the lock screw, I guess you would call it. And I found an old C-clamp that I had that kind of like looked the right styling to me, and then just took it apart, and then fixed some of the defects in it with the file. I did a lot of filing on this. I didn't show everything because you have only so much time in your day to watch me file for hours. I'm going to give you a little sneak peek, but not too much. A lot of fixing the screws, especially after I beat them up, and they've just been mistreated over time. So it's all good, and it's part of what you do. It's enjoyable to me. So here I'm making the tool rest. I had the idea to make sort of the bottom part that attaches to the adjustment arm curved to sort of match the styling of it. I did okay with this. I think this is more of a temporary fix to get the tool usable, but it doesn't really actually match what was originally on it, and it's not actually long enough. This is just some angle iron that I cut a chunk off of, and then did a lot of shaping on it. Did not need to show all that on camera, so it's fine. It's fine. It's temporary. And now we're on to the good old reassembly. You can see now what the paint looks like Before I used the paint in a rattle can that was actually recommended by Hand Tool Rescue, and I was actually really happy with the results. So you can see on the foot that I actually got, it has a little keeper spring in there. So you knock that in, and then it helps that that foot not come off over time. And yeah, I actually really like that. I feel like the style works really well. I had a hard time finding a picture of what the foot should have looked like, so I kind of just imagined. After all the prep work and cleaning and everything I did, reassembly was actually kind of a dream. You know, as you do, you make a few mistakes and you have to go back and fix them and adjustments as you're reassembling the tool itself. The brass screw that I'm putting on there, I thought that was an acorn nut originally, but it actually wasn't after kind of inspecting it and getting it clean. It's kind of a knurled acorn nut instead of one that you would take off with like a wrench, for example, like a hexagon shape. I got a cheap grinding disc from Lowe's and installed it on here. It actually works really well. Besides, you know, the whole tool has some slop in it after all this time, so it's not perfect, but I got pretty decent results out of it. And there you go. I'm reassembling the tool rest that I made with the adjustment arm, and you can see the brass plate's already on there. I think that it looks good by not being so new. There's something about maybe putting tools together where I don't want them to look completely brand new all the time. Sometimes I want them to look like they're old, but just in good shape, I guess. A couple of things that were missing. You see me, I just put in a wing screw, and what that does is it actually helps adjust the play and the wheel to the driving rod to the actual stone. You definitely need that, because what it's doing is putting pressure to put down on the wheel to actually give a little bit better experience. There it is, all done. Put some beauty shots in here. I'm very pleased with how this thing came out all in. It's such a cool looking tool, and it functions really well. I got a lot of great results when I sharpened it, like a really dull chisel and then a tiny little hatchet. This is something I'm going to use. I mean, the whole purpose was to make this for another video, and I think you'll see this show up. And so there's kind of the before and after shot. And thanks for bearing with this kind of longer video. I hope that you guys are safe and your life is as stress-free as it can be. Have a good one.